Was always aware that I was my family's second best child. Neither of my parents ever said it out loud. They were not obliged to. Their deeds were more powerful than words. Mike, my brother, was their heir apparent, their eldest child, their excitement and pride. They thought he couldn't do anything wrong because he was 2 years older than me. He damaged Mom's favorite vase while playing baseball in the house when we were youngsters, I recall. Mom simply grinned and said, "Boys will be boys," rather than reprimanding him. "Honey, at least you're working on your swing." A week later, however, things were completely different when I unintentionally spilled juice on the carpet. "Irene, how could you be so careless?" I can still hear Mom's voice. "Go get the cleaning supplies right now, and you're grounded for the weekend." My early years were framed by these unfair norms. When Mike received failing grades, our parents would respond, "Well, he's just more focused on sports right now." However, if I had an A- rather than an A+, they would hardly take their eyes off their phones and say, "You could do better if you tried harder." My grandmother was the only one who actually saw me. Her home became my haven, and she lived only a few blocks away. She did swoon over Mike, too. She attended all of his games, brought him cookies, and handled everything. She did, however, take note of my accomplishments, unlike my parents. Year after year, the trend persisted. Mike's birthday celebrations were lavish events complete with beautiful cakes, bouncy houses, and scores of friends. My birthdays, my parents, in fact, forgot them completely half the time. I can still recall my 10th birthday. I waited for someone to speak while I sat at the breakfast table. Dad was reading the newspaper as Mom worked on Mike's science project. When I eventually plucked up the nerve to remind them that night, Dad seemed truly shocked. "Oh, I see. Cheers to your birthday, child. Next time we're at the mall, we'll get you something." They didn't. Grandma was the only one who remembered. Every time she visited, she would bring a handcrafted cupcake, a solitary candle, and a tiny gift. Whispering, "Make a wish, my dear," and I felt important for a second. I came to terms with it. To have no expectations. To be taken aback by even the slightest recognition. I gave my studies my all attention. I became a member of every academic club I could locate. I made an effort to separate myself from Mike's shadow. I might as well have been invisible at home, though. Things changed the day Grandma fell ill. Mike was 16 and I was 14. I stayed in the hospital with her every afternoon, working on my schoolwork in the uncomfortable chair next to her bed while she slept. Mike also came, although not as often. He was busy with football practice, and our parents said that was important for his future. One evening, just a few days before she passed away, she called our whole family to her hospital room. Mom, Dad, Mike, and I gathered around her bed. Her voice was weak, but determined as she looked directly at Dad. "Son," she said, gripping his hand, "I want you to promise me something about my inheritance." She paused to catch her breath. "Promise me you'll use it for both of their educations, Mike's and Irene's. Both of them need to go to college." Dad nodded solemnly. "Of course, Mom. I promise you right here in front of everyone that your inheritance will go to both Mike's and Irene's education." After Grandma's death, I threw myself into my studies with even more determination. Even though I knew about her inheritance and Dad's promise, I wasn't taking any chances. I wanted to prove that I deserved to go to college on my own merits. My report cards were filled with A's, but nobody at home ever asked to see them. I'd leave them on the kitchen counter, hoping someone would notice. But they'd end up buried under takeout menus and Mike's football schedules. The only person who would have proudly displayed them on her fridge was no longer there to do so. I joined the debate club despite my hands shaking every time I had to speak in public. "Clear your throat less, Irene," my debate coach would say. "You have good arguments. Let them hear them." Gradually, my voice grew stronger. Though at home, it remained as invisible as ever. I won first place in the state science fair with my project on renewable energy. The local newspaper even ran a small article about it. I left it on Dad's desk, but it disappeared under a stack of papers, unread. Meanwhile, Mike's every football game made it onto our family calendar, marked with bright red circles. Then came Mike's graduation. Suddenly, our normally quiet house transformed into party central. Mom spent weeks planning every detail, from the catering to the decorations. "We're so proud of you, son," Dad announced during the party, clinking his glass for attention. The backyard was packed with relatives, friends, and what seemed like half the neighborhood. Not only has our boy graduated, but he's also heading to Preston University this fall. Mike sat there grinning, keys to his new car dangling from his fingers. I stood in the corner holding a plate of cake I wasn't eating. "Thanks to Mom's inheritance," Dad continued, his voice thick with emotion, "we've been able to secure Mike's future at one of the best colleges in the country. She would have been so proud." The guests erupted in applause and congratulations. 2 months later, we drove Mike to Preston University, 6 states away. Mom and Dad helped him move into his dorm, took hundreds of pictures, and spent 2 extra days in town just to make sure he was settled and okay. After that, our house became Mike's satellite campus. Mom and Dad called him every day, sometimes putting him on speaker so his voice would fill the kitchen during dinner. They drove up to visit him at least twice a month, always returning with stories about his classes, his friends, and his football practice. Meanwhile, I continued my senior year alone in my quiet room. I studied for tests nobody would celebrate. I won competitions nobody would attend. I prepared for a future I wasn't sure I'd be allowed to have. 2 years passed quickly, and I finished high school at the top of my class. Not that anyone at home noticed or cared. On graduation day, I put on my white dress and honor cords alone. My parents had left 3 days earlier for a much-needed vacation with Mike. "We'll bring you back a souvenir," Mom had said casually, as if missing my graduation was as trivial as missing a Tuesday dinner. I sat among my classmates during the ceremony, watching other parents beam and take photos. My friend Jenny's mom even took some pictures of me, saying, "Your parents will want to see these." I didn't have the heart to tell her they probably wouldn't. While my classmates celebrated with their families, I went home and started working on my college applications. I'd been preparing for this moment for months, carefully crafting essays, gathering recommendation letters, and documenting all my academic achievements. The acceptance letters started arriving a week later. Evergreen State University offered me a full scholarship with free dorm accommodations. Their letter praised my academic achievements and extracurricular activities. Then came the acceptance from Blackwood Private College. Their program was exactly what I wanted, though the tuition was steep. Not as expensive as Mike's Preston University, but still substantial. I knew my parents still had my portion of Grandma's inheritance. I'd overheard them discussing money matters enough times to know it was there, waiting, just as Grandma had intended. So I waited for their return, the Blackwood acceptance letter safely tucked away in my desk drawer, the Evergreen offer hidden as my backup plan. They came back tanned and cheerful 2 weeks later. Mike had already headed back to Preston to hang with his brothers, as Dad proudly announced. I waited until after dinner, when they were relaxed and still sharing vacation stories. "I got accepted to Blackwood College," I said during a rare moment of silence. "Their business program is highly ranked." Mom glanced up briefly from her phone. "That's nice, dear." "I'd need to pay tuition," I continued, my heart beating faster. I was hoping we could use my portion of Grandma's inheritance. The silence that followed was different, heavier somehow. Dad sat down his coffee mug, exchanging a look with Mom. "We don't have money for your college tuition," he said flatly. I felt my chest tighten. "But Grandma's inheritance," I said, my voice shaking. She made you promise in front of everyone that it would go to both our educations. Mom had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but Dad just shrugged. We spent that money on our vacation. The rest went to your brother. He needed it more. It was an expensive trip, Mom added, as if that explained everything. And Mike's tuition isn't getting any cheaper. He needs the extra support. I stared at my parents, trying to process what they'd just said. The room felt too small, too hot. You promised her, I said, my voice trembling. Grandma made you promise. We were all there, you, Mom, Mike, me. She made you swear you'd use the money for both our educations. Dad took another sip of his coffee, not even looking at me. I just didn't want to upset my mother in her final days. We knew from the start we wouldn't be giving you any of that money. Something inside me snapped. 18 years of being invisible, of swallowing my words, of accepting their neglect, it all came rushing out at once. You're liars, I shouted, standing up so quickly my chair fell backward. You're nothing but liars who betray your own mother's dying wish. You spent my college money on a vacation. You gave it to Mike, who already had his share. You've been lying to everyone, to Grandma, to me. Get out. Dad's words cut through my tirade like ice. I thought I'd misheard. You heard your father, Mom said, her voice cold. Get out of this house. You're 18 now, an adult. If you're so independent that you can talk to us this way, you can take care of yourself. Before I could respond, Mom grabbed my arm and practically dragged me upstairs to my room. She yanked my old suitcase from under the bed and threw it at my feet. Pack your things, she said, pulling open my drawers. I want you out of here first thing tomorrow morning. I stood there frozen, watching as she pulled out the suitcase's expandable handle. This was really happening. My own parents were throwing me out. Mom, I started to say, but the look she gave me was one I'd never seen before. Like I was a stranger who had invaded her home. That's when it hit me. They were strangers, too. Maybe they always had been. The people I'd been trying to please all these years, hoping for their love and approval, didn't really exist. These were just two people who happened to share my DNA. I packed in silence. Clothes, books, my laptop, the few precious photos I had of Grandma. Mom stood in the doorway watching, arms crossed, as if making sure I wouldn't steal anything. As if there was anything in this house I wanted any more. When my suitcase was full, I took out my phone and texted Jenny. Can I come over? It's important. Her response was immediate. Of course. Doors open. I walked out without saying goodbye. Nobody tried to stop me. Jenny's parents had given her a small apartment for her 18th birthday, just a few blocks away. She was waiting at her door when I arrived. She took one look at my face and my suitcase and pulled me into a hug. That night, as we sat on her couch drinking hot chocolate, I made my decision. I would accept the offer from Evergreen State University. The full scholarship and free dorm would be my ticket to independence, but I needed money for books and living expenses, so I'd have to work first. That summer at Sunnyside Cafe taught me more than just how to make the perfect latte. Between taking orders and balancing trays, I learned what it meant to stand on my own feet. My tips went straight into a savings account, growing dollar by dollar, while my paychecks covered basic necessities. When fall came, I hugged Jenny goodbye and moved into my dorm at Evergreen State. My roommate, Sarah, took one look at my sparse belongings and offered to share her mini fridge. That simple kindness almost made me cry. I found a job at the college library, shelving books and manning the reference desk during evening shifts. Between classes, work, and studying, I barely had time to think about my former life. The library became my sanctuary, quiet, orderly, and predictable. Everything my family life hadn't been. When relatives called, their questions were always strange and probing. Aunt Linda's voice would be full of barely concealed concern. Do you have somewhere to sleep at night, dear? Uncle Bob would ask, "Are you getting enough to eat?" I'd answer truthfully that I was fine, wondering what stories they'd been told about my life. Sometimes Jenny would start to tell me news about my family. "Hey, I heard your brother." But I'd cut her off immediately. "I don't want to know," I'd say. And she'd understand. The holidays could have been hard, but Jenny's family wouldn't hear of me spending them alone. That first Christmas at their house, I sat at their dining table surrounded by warmth and genuine affection. Jenny's dad, Mr. Peterson, pulled me aside after dinner. "Irene," he said, his voice serious but kind, "I've been watching how hard you work. When you graduate, there'll be a place for you at Peterson Technologies if you want it." I accepted on the spot, tears threatening to spill over. Finally, someone was noticing my effort, my determination. Graduation came faster than I expected. I stood on stage, accepting my diploma with highest honors, scanning the crowd out of habit. Jenny and her parents were there, cheering loudly enough to drown out the crowd. I didn't look for any other familiar faces. I arrived at Peterson Technologies on my first day there dressed in a suit that I had saved up for at the library. I was managing my own projects in 6 months. By the second year, I had a group of people working for me. Mr. Peterson had good reason to believe in me. I worked more hours than anyone else, poured myself into every challenge, and soon established a reputation for finding solutions to problems that others couldn't. Naturally, there were raises and promotions. Before I knew it, I was making more money than I had ever imagined while I was counting tips at the cafe. I began attending yoga classes, acquired business attire, and accompanied Jenny on trips to destinations I had only read about in magazines. My birthdays shifted from being a reminder of my negligence to becoming a celebration of my accomplishments. Jenny would plan intimate get-togethers with only close coworkers, delicious food, and sincere laughter. No imposed family dynamics. No pretense. No pain. My 27th birthday was approaching, and I had a secret I'd been keeping even from Jenny. For the past 5 years, I'd been saving every extra penny, Christmas bonuses, performance rewards, even the money I would have spent on lunch by bringing sandwiches from home instead of buying from the cafe downstairs. Every dollar went into my special savings account labeled simply Dream. The dream became reality 3 weeks before my birthday. I stood in an empty living room with high ceilings and huge windows, hardwood floors gleaming in the afternoon sun, and signed the papers that made it mine. My own apartment. Not rented. Owned. "Congratulations," the realtor said, handing me the keys. "It's all yours." That evening, feeling a bit bold and maybe a little proud, I did something I rarely did. I posted on social media. Just me standing in my empty but beautiful living room, keys dangling from my fingers, unable to contain my smile. The caption read, "Early birthday gift to myself. Dreams do come true when you work hard enough. New home. Birthday gift. Blessed." The likes and comments started pouring in immediately. Jenny's was first, of course. Finally, can't wait for the housewarming party. My colleagues chimed in with their congratulations. Even some relatives I hadn't heard from in years liked the post and left comments like, "So proud of you," and "Happy early birthday." I was sitting at my desk at work a week later, reviewing quarterly reports when my phone buzzed. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I recognized it instantly. My mother's voice came through the speaker, sweet as honey and just as sticky. "Irene, sweetheart, I saw your beautiful new apartment on Facebook, and I suddenly remembered your birthday is coming up." Suddenly remembered. After many years of forgetting. "It's wonderful to see you doing so well," she continued, her voice dripping with an enthusiasm I'd never heard directed at me before. "Your father and I have been thinking we should celebrate your birthday properly this year at home. We'll invite the whole family." I almost laughed out loud. "Of course. Years of silence, and now that I had a fancy apartment, suddenly I was worth remembering. Worth celebrating. "We've missed you so much," she added, and I could almost see her practiced, concerned expression through the phone. "It's time for the family to come together again. What do you say?" I should have said no. I should have told her exactly what I thought about her sudden attack of maternal affection. Instead, I heard myself saying, "Sure, Mom. Why not?" As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but smile, though there was no warmth in it. After all these years, I was curious to see what game they were playing. I pulled up to my parents' house in my new Mercedes, the engine purring softly as I parked. The contrast between my car and the house was stark: peeling paint, missing shingles, and an overgrown lawn. My parents appeared in the doorway before I even reached it. Their eyes locked onto my car first, then shifted to my designer suit and heels. I watched their expressions change, noticing the calculating gleam in their eyes. Iron. Mom rushed forward to hug me, her enthusiasm almost making me step back. "You look expensive." Dad hung back, trying and failing to look casual. They both seemed older than I remembered, more gray hair, deeper wrinkles, shoulders slightly stooped. The inside of the house was worse than the outside. The furniture I remembered from my childhood was worn and faded. The carpet was threadbare. And there, sprawled on the couch like he'd never left, was Mike. He gained weight, lost hair, and sat beside a young woman whose pregnant belly strained against her dress. "Hey, sis," he said, not bothering to get up. "Meet Sarah, my wife." Mom quickly jumped in with explanations I hadn't asked for. "Mike's staying with us temporarily. Well, college wasn't quite the right fit. But he's got some promising job prospects. Going on 9 years of temporary, I thought, but kept my face neutral. The guests will be here soon," Dad said, gesturing to a table laden with food. "But first, tell us about your job. That's quite a car you're driving." "Must be making good money, huh?" "Things are fine," I replied smoothly, sidestepping the question. "The catering looks nice." "But what exactly do you do?" Mom pressed. "That apartment of yours must cost a fortune. And a Mercedes?" I smiled blandly. "I work in management. How's everyone been?" Before they could probe further, the doorbell rang. Suddenly, the house was full of relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. They swarmed around me with hugs and exclamations. Aunt Helen pulled me aside during the commotion, her voice low. "I'm so glad you finally came to your senses, dear. Your parents have been so worried. It must have been hard, living like that." I turned to her, confused. "Like what?" She glanced around before whispering, "You know, after you ran away with that boy, living on the streets, refusing to work." She patted my arm. "But look at you now, all cleaned up and respectable again." The pieces clicked into place. While I'd been building my career, earning promotions, and buying my apartment, my parents had been spinning tales about their shameful, runaway daughter. Their version of events painted them as the worried, abandoned parents of a wayward child. And I'd played right into their hands by cutting off contact with the extended family. Once everyone was seated at the table, Dad stood up, raising his glass. "We're here today to celebrate our wonderful daughter," he announced, his voice thick with fake emotion. "We're so proud of what she's become." Mom dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, tears I'd seen her practice for school plays decades ago. "The family should stick together," she said, reaching for my hand across the table. I kept mine firmly in my lap. That's what matters most, family supporting each other. The word supporting wasn't used subtly. Her glances at my pricey jewelry and luxury watch weren't either. "Your father and I always knew you'd make something of yourself," she added, sniffling. When she was done, I waited for a time in silence. Then I got up and smoothed my dress slowly. I said, "Thank you all for coming," in a calm, clear voice. The fact that my folks noticed my birthday this year is actually rather interesting. Really, it's the first time. The room became silent. Mom's feigned tears quickly dried up. You know, my birthdays were never recognized when I was growing up. Not one. However, I suppose a Mercedes and an apartment in a great area of town make birthdays more special, don't they? Dad cautioned. "Irene, now isn't the time." "Oh, but it is." I turned to speak to everyone at the table. Earlier, Aunt Helen shared something fascinating with me. I reportedly ran away from home with a boy when I was 18, ended up homeless, and refused to work. There was no comedy in my laughter. I'd love to hear more about this mysterious bad boy I supposedly ran away with. Mom's voice was anxious and high as she jumped in. "The past is the past, darling. Let's avoid." The day after I graduated from high school, they threw me out. "The truth," I shouted, raising my voice above hers. "Are you curious as to why?" Mike shifted in his chair uneasily. Some family members gave a nod. "Because I reminded them that they used our grandmother's money to pay for Mike's and my college education, as they had promised her on her deathbed." "Dad, do you recall that promise? In front of everyone, you succeeded. However, they gave Mike the remainder and used my share on an opulent trip. When I ventured to ask them about it, they threw me out." Mom muttered, "That's not true," in protest. However, I could see the relatives' eyes lit up with recognition. "I earned admission to college, worked my way through it, and started my profession from nothing. And until they spotted my new apartment on Facebook, they didn't remember my birthday or call me once in 9 years. There was an overwhelming quiet in the room. My parents were the object of Aunt Helen's undisguised disdain. Uncle Bob was gently shaking his head. Taking up my purse, I remarked, "I apologize for disturbing this beautiful celebration. However, I believed that everyone should be aware of the reality." I didn't return to make amends. I returned to correct the record. The journey home was freeing. Everything was set up in my apartment, a catered meal that I had planned days in advance, fully aware of how this evening would turn out. Jenny came first, then my coworkers and real friends. We celebrated not just my birthday, but also my liberation from the lies by eating and drinking. That night, the messages began to arrive. Mom is pleading with me to change my mind. Dad stating that they were mistaken. Mike is requesting assistance with his temporary predicament. One by one, I blocked their numbers.